The year is 1979. The Sony Walkman makes its debut. McDonald's introduces the Happy Meal, brilliant piece of marketing there. And on a more serious note, a group of Iranian students seize the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking over 50 American hostages and triggering an international crisis. Meanwhile, pop music continues to evolve. Here are my top 10 rock albums for the year 1979. I had considered using the censored version of this album cover, but it's just so bland, so in the end I decided to go for the original. Now that cover, of course, designed by Storm Thorgerson from the famed design group Hipgnosis. I've mentioned them before on my channel. They designed so many iconic rock album covers from the 70s and beyond. And here's a quote from Thorgerson from years later regarding the album cover. He says, "Not exactly the most politically correct scene you've ever seen. I thought it was funny, but women read a different inflection into it now." Cue Nigel Tufnell from Spinal Tap.
Well, so what?
Yeah.
But what's wrong with being sexy? I mean, there's no trouble with sex.
The record opens with Lovin' You Sunday Morning. I love Klaus's vocal on that. The guitar part is interesting. It starts off with some standard rock and roll type chords, power chords and suspended chords. But then makes great use of some diminished chords, not really common in hard rock. At the end of the chorus, we get this. Great little B diminished thing, right? We got the B root, octave, tritone in the middle. Then he puts an A on the bottom and arpeggiates it. Love the sound of that. And then they do a similar thing in the bridge. You know the part with the ahs? Ah! Some nice little diminished chords there too. Every Scorpions album's good for one or two killer ballads. You've got Holiday and Always Somewhere. Always Somewhere sounds an awful lot like Lynyrd Skynyrd's Simple Man. Did you ever think about it? Almost the same chord structure and a very similar groove. And finally, Is There Anybody There is one of my favorites. It's got a great melody, as the Scorpions generally do, and the combination of a reggae beat and those crunchy heavy metal guitars is kind of irresistible. This marks the first appearance of Supertramp on my channel. Happy to get them in. Breakfast in America was a smash hit, over 4 times platinum in the US, sold very well in their native Britain, and interestingly, sold amazingly well in France, of all places. Apparently, this is the 4th best-selling album of all time there, over 3 million. Who knew? The album spawned 3 hit singles: The Logical Song, Goodbye Stranger, and Take the Long Way Home. The title track was also released as a single. Didn't sell as well as the others, but has since become a classic rock staple. I think The Logical Song is my favorite, written by Supertramp co-founder Roger Hodgson, and inspired by his experience of being sent away to boarding school and feeling crushed by the discipline and strict regimentation there. It's always felt to me like sort of a rock and roll version of a great novel by the German author Hermann Hesse called Beneath the Wheel, which chronicles a similar story about a young boy who eventually ends up committing suicide by drowning himself in a river. The opening verse paints a vivid picture of the loss of innocence. When I was young, it seemed that life was so wonderful, a miracle. Oh, it was beautiful, magical. And all the birds in the trees, they'd be singing so happily, oh, joyfully, oh, playfully watching me. But then they sent me away to teach me how to be sensible, logical, oh, responsible, practical. And then they showed me a world where I could be so dependable, oh, clinical, oh, intellectual, cynical. And Breakfast in America is such a simple tune, but I love it. Basic progression in the key of C minor. We get the classic rock piano ballad intro. C minor slash B, C minor slash A flat. G7, that's the 5 chord. Back to the 1. Here's a nice little F minor 7th, B flat. Take a look at my girlfriend, she's the only one I got. Not much of a girlfriend, I never seem to get a lot. Due to the cover art and the lyrics on tunes like Gone Hollywood, Child Division, and Breakfast in America, many have interpreted this as a sort of concept album, a satire on America and American culture. But the band have always denied this. Whatever the case, this is a landmark album. You can throw Van Halen 2 right in there on the long list of hard rock albums that music critics completely missed the boat on. I distinctly remember the Rolling Stone record guide saying that Van Halen 2 was about as imaginative as its title. What a joke. This is a great album, and it may be sacrilege, but if I had to choose, I think I would even take it over their debut album. Overall, this album has a bit more of a lighthearted feel than its predecessor. We get a cover of You're No Good, which of course was a huge hit for Linda Ronstadt just a few years before. And then you have originals like Dance the Night Away, clearly aimed at a more pop market, not only musically but lyrically. Roth gives us, have you seen her? So fine and pretty, fooled me with her style and ease. And I feel her from across the room. Yes, it's love in the 3rd degree. You definitely weren't hearing those kind of lyrics from the likes of Black Sabbath or Led Zeppelin. But don't worry, this album definitely rocks too. You've got stuff like Somebody Get Me a Doctor. And Light Up the Sky, which starts with a dramatic series of chromatically ascending fifths and then ends up on a riff that sounds like it could have come from a mid-70s Deep Purple album. Back in those days, we guitar players eagerly awaited the new Van Halen albums just to see what crazy new sounds Eddie would come up with. And he never disappointed. This record has a great tune called Women in Love. It's got a very basic chord progression in the intro. E sus4, B, and then D sus4, A. But he plays the chords arpeggiated. He taps harmonics with his right hand. It gives this amazing chime-like effect.
The speaker was an angel. shook his crumpled wings, closed his eyes, and moved his lips. This time we should be going.
This album is the third in what is known as Bowie's Berlin trilogy, Low and Heroes being the other two. Most of the songs on this record were collaborations between Bowie and the British musician / producer / artist Brian Eno. Many of them used an idea Eno popularized called oblique strategies, which involved small printed cards placed in a black box. You draw out a card, and each one contains some direction designed to break artists out of creative ruts. For example, one card might direct the band members to swap instruments. That could certainly get you out of your comfort zone. Lyrically, this album has two main themes. Side 1 is mostly about travel, and side 2 perhaps critiques of late 70s American culture. Bowie always seemed fascinated by that. Remember, years later, he would write and record a tune called I'm Afraid of Americans. The album opens with Fantastic Voyage, featuring a really impressive vocal by Bowie. Great voice control with the long-held notes and really aggressive, wide vibrato. Boys Keep Swingin' is a bit of a throwback to Bowie's glam days with its gender-bending lyrics. We get stuff like, when you're a boy, you can wear a uniform. When you're a boy, other boys check you out. You get a girl. These are your favorite things when you're a boy. DJ is a fun tune. Bowie said the lyrics were a satire on late 70s DJ / disco culture. But I think my favorite is Look Back in Anger, which, by the way, uses the exact same chord progression as Fantastic Voyage. I think that was one of Eno's oblique strategies in action right there. The tune is primarily in E Mixolydian mode, and the vocal melody is taken from that scale. You know who I am, he said. The speaker was an angel. He coughed and shook his crumpled wings, closed his eyes and moved his lips. Now right there, that's the cool part. That C chord is an example of modal interchange. We would not expect that in an E Mixolydian progression. But it sounds great, and being the wise musician that he is, right when that C chord hits, Bowie gravitates towards the C note. Perfect. By the way, that song has a great video by a guy called David Mallet. It's got a real Dorian Gray theme. Bowie is in his artist studio, and as his face becomes ravaged, the painting becomes more beautiful.
Aurora borealis, the icy sky at night, paddles cut the water in a long and hurried flight from the white man.
In Rust Never Sleeps, we have what is in my mind the last great Neil Young album. What a run he had throughout the 70s. Pretty much everything he put out in that decade was top-notch in my opinion. In true Neil fashion, the title of the album refers to his desire to avoid complacency and keep his music evolving, which is definitely something he did in the years ahead. And speaking of musical evolution, I think it's really interesting that Neil includes a reference to Sex Pistols frontman Johnny Rotten in the album's opening track, Hey Hey My My. The king is gone, but he's not forgotten. This is the story of a Johnny Rotten. It's better to burn out than it is to rust. And if that wasn't enough, Neil bookends the album with another version of the same tune at the end, but what could only be called a punk rock version, featuring what is probably the most raunchy, distorted guitar sound I've ever heard. It's things like this that earned Neil the title Godfather of Grunge in the 90s. I still prefer the acoustic version that opens the album. It's a really pretty song. Hale's talent as a lyricist is on full display here, particularly on Powderfinger. The song's protagonist is a young boy who's forced to protect his family from an approaching gunboat. All the men are gone, so the responsibility falls on his shoulders. We don't really know what the time period is. I always assumed maybe Civil War America, but it doesn't really matter. That final verse is so moving. Daddy's rifle in my hand felt reassuring. He told me red means run, son, and numbers add up to nothing. But when the first shot hit the dock, I saw it coming. Raised my rifle to my eye, never stopped to wonder why. Then I saw black and my face splashed in the sky.
I've been around the world. I've seen a million girls. Ain't one of them gone. When my lady, she's gone.
Highway to Hell really shot AC/DC up to a new level, not only because of the great songs, but because of the production. For the first time, the band recruited famed producer Robert Mutt Lange, and the results were stupendous. This album sounds beefier than any of the previous ones, so important in the world of hard rock. One of the great production elements on this album is the way that Angus and Malcolm Young's guitars are recorded. Angus, being the lead guitarist, has a very crunchy, heavily distorted tone, whereas brother Malcolm has an amazingly clean tone, sort of a twang almost, that you don't expect in hard rock. Nowhere is this more evident than on Beatin' Around the Bush, a great frenzied track that closes side one. Angus starts with a killer riff that sounds something like this. And then after a couple of repetitions, brother Malcolm comes in playing the exact same riff, but with an almost country twang. It's a great effect, and they enhance it by panning the two guitars hard left and right. A lot of rock guys figure if you want a big sound, you just stack as many heavily distorted guitars as you can. But no, by having the clean and the dirty sound, you get the full spectrum, and it actually sounds much fatter. By the way, Malcolm Young admitted that this riff was heavily influenced by the old Fleetwood Mac tune, Oh Well. Seems pretty obvious once you're aware of it. AC/DC riffs are always so much fun to play, including the title track. It's so simple, just A, D, G, but I love the way they enhance that D to G change with some bass notes. He throws an F sharp on the bottom of the D chord, always a great sound, which then resolves up a half step for the G chord. It's very subtle but very important. And finally, I'll mention a very dark story associated with this album. In 1985, a very disturbed individual named Richard Ramirez committed 15 brutal murders around the LA area. The press nicknamed him Night Stalker, and it later came out that he was a big fan of AC/DC, particularly the song Night Prowler from the Highway to Hell album. Obviously, it resulted in some very bad press for the band, with some people even blaming their music for the murders. Classic idiocy there. I mean, millions of us managed to listen to that song without going out and killing people, right? It's with mixed feelings that I present Led Zeppelin's In Through the Outdoor. Happy to be talking about another great Zeppelin album. Sad because this was the end of the line for Led Zeppelin. Their final album, as I'm sure most of you know, drummer John Bonham passed away in September of the following year, and that was it. In my top 10 albums of 1976 video, I discussed how Zeppelin's previous album, Presence, was dominated by electric guitar. Well, this album was a complete shift. Guitarist Jimmy Page was in the throes of heroin addiction. Drummer John Bonham was rapidly drinking himself to death. So this album is dominated by keyboardist and bassist John Paul Jones and singer Robert Plant. This is easily Zeppelin's most keyboard-heavy album. And I love the fact that they went out doing an album that sounded like nothing else they had ever done. Always the innovators. In spite of Page's addiction problems, there's some great guitar playing on this album. The tune Hot Dog is straight up rockabilly, and with Page's loose style, it comes across like what I would imagine Chet Atkins might have sounded like after a few Jägermeister shots. Hot Dog also features some great tongue-in-cheek lyrics from Robert Plant. Here's the verse that takes us into Page's guitar solo. I took her love at 17, a little late these days it seems, but they say heaven's well worth waiting for. I took her word, I took it all, beneath the sign that said U-Haul. She left angels hanging round for more. All My Love is another tune that was a serious departure for Zeppelin. It's a pretty ballad written for Robert Plant's son, who had died tragically in 1977. Great keyboard intro from John Paul Jones. That's an A minor, G bass, E minor with a G bass, and then G major with a D bass, followed by D minor. And I love what Jones does in his solo. It's basically an A harmonic minor. He spells out an A minor triad, A, C, E, but what he does, he hits each chord tone, drops back a half step, and then back to the original chord tone. He does it for A, then the C, and E. It's a great effect, something you should think about using in your own improvisations.
Giant steps are what you take, walking on the moon. I hope my leg don't break, walking on the moon. We could walk forever, walking on the moon.
And that, of course, Walking on the Moon. What an incredible song. The reason I love that thing so much is because somehow, musically, they managed to make it sound like what Walking on the Moon looks like. Now, there are several things that go into creating that amazing vibe. Number one, Andy Summers' guitar. That incredible silvery tone. I think it's some chorus and delay. Of course, I'll never succeed in matching it, but something like... And the chord that he chooses, that's a D minor 11th, filled with mystery and suspense. Next, you've got Sting's voice soaring up to the heavens, and there's a distance in the sound, the way it's recorded. All of this goes to imply the vastness of space. Finally, you've got the rhythm section. Sting's bass line and Stuart Copeland's drumming, they literally leave a lot of open space, which further contributes to that feeling of immensity. And the bounciness of the rhythm, for me, always mimicked the look of that jerky, bouncy spacewalk that we see in all the old videos. This thing is really a work of art. A while back, I did a full song breakdown on another classic from this record, Message in a Bottle. Definitely check that one out if you're a Police fan. But just briefly, I want to go over something I mentioned in that video. It uses those great Andy Summers chords that are in quite a few Police songs. It's very simple. It's a root and a fifth and then a ninth on top. So much more interesting than a normal power chord. And let's talk about Sting as a lyricist. Loneliness is definitely an overarching theme on this record. Obviously, Message in a Bottle, with its simple message of you're not alone at being alone. You've got Bring on the Night, an achingly beautiful tune with a real emotional vocal from Sting. And then you've got The Bed's Too Big Without You. The title alone is worth the price of admission, right? And you get lyrics like these. Since that day when you'd gone, just had to carry on. I get through the day, but late at night, made love to my pillow, but it didn't feel right. All I made was one mistake. Now the bed's too big without you. Regatta de Blanc went to number 1 in the UK. The band's first number 1, definitely not their last. They also won their first Grammy for the title track, Best Rock Instrumental Performance.
Like every word you said was meant to be. No, it couldn't have been that easy to forget about me. Maybe even the losers get lucky sometimes.
Damn the Torpedoes was the third studio album from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and it was a real breakthrough for the band. Made it to number 2 on Billboard, and honestly, the only thing that really kept it from being number 1, it had the misfortune of getting stuck behind Pink Floyd's The Wall, which was the blockbuster of that year. There's a great quote from Petty on that subject. He said, "I love Pink Floyd, but I hated them that year." This album had 4 legitimate hit songs. The first single to be released was Don't Do Me Like That. I could see why they would want to start with that one. It's a real catchy piece of pop. Then came Refugee, which I think is even more interesting. Now, on the surface, it sounds like that song is about a relationship gone bad, certainly a very popular theme in pop music. But Petty says it was actually inspired more by his anger with the music business. Right around this time, he was getting jerked around by the 3-letter corporations of the music industry. I guess ABC was trying to sell his contract to MCA without his knowledge, which he says was in breach of his original contract. Just a big mess. But with lyrics like, "Baby, we ain't the first. I'm sure a lot of other lovers been burned. Right now, this seems real to you. But it's one of those things you got to feel to be true." It's hard to see the connection. Maybe the inspiration showed up more in the pre-chorus and the chorus. It don't make no difference to me. Everybody's got to fight to be free. You see, you don't have to live like a refugee. And then we've got Here Comes My Girl, probably my favorite of the album. It's got a classic Lydian mode progression. A major, and then a B over A. Just maintaining that A bass note on this little B triad creates such a great tension and mystery. Lydian mode is known for that. The raised fourth is the characteristic note. Now the vocal melody is fairly indistinct in the verses. He sort of talks his way through, almost Dylan style. But he does land on that raised 4 enough to enhance the Lydian feel. And then he breaks out into full voice for the pre-chorus. It's that classic sort of pain vocal style that Petty is so known for. And of course, I have to give props to Heartbreakers guitarist Mike Campbell. Always so tasteful, plays exactly what's right for the song, nothing more, nothing less. This song is no exception. That simple little quarter note triplet bit he throws in here is perfect as usual.
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control.
This is a monumental album, #1 for 15 weeks, much to the dismay of Tom Petty. This is the greatest selling double album of all time, over 30 million. It also contained Pink Floyd's only ever #1 single, Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2. They were never really a singles band, but that song was everywhere in 1979 and 80. The concept for The Wall grew out of the band's 1977 In the Flesh tour. By that time, Pink Floyd had become a mega band. They were playing massive venues, and the entire band, but Roger Waters in particular, began to get disenchanted with the whole thing. Apparently, he felt that the audiences were there just to get drunk and take part in the spectacle, not really listening to the music. It got so bad that at one point he spat on some audience members in the front row. And so a couple of years later, we get the concept album, The Wall. It's very autobiographical. It's about a rock star named Pink who becomes disenchanted and erects a psychological wall between himself, his audience, and really everyone in his life. When the band toured in support of this album, it was very theatrical. A physical wall was constructed on stage as the show progressed. Pretty cool idea. One thing I love that Pink Floyd does from time to time is the way they divvy up the lead vocal duties in certain songs. Great examples of that on this record are Hey You and Comfortably Numb. In Hey You, guitarist Dave Gilmour takes the first 2 verses. He's got a very mellow, soothing voice that sounds great over that acoustic guitar part in the intro. And then Roger Waters takes the final verse in that demented wail of his that sounds like nothing else. I love it. As the lyrics get more desperate, so does the vocal. And then on Comfortably Numb, they sort of reverse it. Waters sings the verses, really talks his way through, very subdued. Hello, is there anybody in there? And so when Gilmour comes in on the choruses, there is no pain. It just feels like the heavens have opened up. And they further enhance that mood by doing the verses in B minor and then switching to D major for the choruses. It further lightens the mood and makes it seem even more beautiful. Now I've got that feeling once again. I can't explain, you would not understand. This is not how I am. I have become comfortably numb. And Gilmour's fade-out solo on Comfortably Numb frequently tops the list when greatest rock guitar solos of all time are discussed. Funny, I love it. It's a great solo. I actually prefer the shorter solo that he does earlier in the tune. It's so pretty and well put together. So that's it for right now. By the way, if you'd like to support the channel financially in any small way, there is a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description of this video. Certainly not expected, but much appreciated. I do drink a lot of coffee. Thanks a lot. We'll see you.